The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, thick with murmurs and whispers that bounced off the cold, hard walls. People filled the seats, shoulder to shoulder, their eyes locked on the defendant's table. Rumors swirled, each one juicier than the last. And then the door opened. In walked Richard Westbrook, a towering figure with broad shoulders, dressed in a sleek black designer suit that oozed wealth. His every step was a display of arrogance, his perfectly styled hair reflecting the harsh courtroom lights. The room fell silent as he made his way to the defendant's seat. He smirked, clearly enjoying the attention, as if he was the guest of honor rather than the accused. He had been the subject of countless media stories in recent weeks, but it wasn't his entrance that drew the most attention. It was the moment the judge entered. Judge Cynthia King entered, her black robe flowing as she walked with purpose and authority. She didn't need to say a word to command respect. Her mere presence demanded it. The courtroom rose in unison as the bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Cynthia King." Everyone stood, except for Richard Westbrook. The murmurs started and the silence became thick with tension. Richard remained seated, casually flipping through a legal pad, as if this was just another inconvenience for him. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Richard flicked him off with a dismissive gesture. Judge King paused at her bench, her gaze cold and unyielding. She didn't flinch or raise her voice, but the atmosphere in the room shifted. The crowd could feel the shift, the rising tide of disbelief. Who did this man think he was? Richard didn't even flinch. He sat there with a smug expression, his arrogance on full display, as though daring Judge King to take action. The tension in the room was suffocating. It was clear to everyone that Richard believed his wealth and influence could shield him from the consequences of his actions. "You may be seated," Judge King finally said, her voice calm but firm. She didn't address the disrespect directly, but everyone knew she was in control. The air in the room was thick with a kind of quiet fury. Richard continued to sit, unfazed, flipping through papers on his desk as the room held its breath. It was clear that this trial was not just about legalities. It was a clash of wills, and Richard Westbrook was about to learn that his wealth could not protect him from justice. Richard Westbrook wasn't just any wealthy man. He was the type of billionaire whose name made headlines for all the wrong reasons. Luxury yachts, multi-million-dollar estates, private jets, and lavish parties. He seemed untouchable above the law. His business empire, Westbrook Holdings, had once been touted as a success story, a beacon of financial achievement. But behind the glitzy facade was a darker truth. Westbrook had built his empire by deceiving hardworking families and small business owners, convincing them to invest their savings in fraudulent schemes. He promised them bright futures, only to watch their hopes and money disappear overnight. Families lost their homes, children were forced to drop out of school, and elderly couples faced the terrifying prospect of living in poverty for the rest of their lives. Westbrook didn't care. For him, it was just business. When the authorities finally caught up with him, the evidence was undeniable. Bank records, falsified documents, and testimonies from former employees all pointed to one clear truth. Westbrook had been running a massive scam, yet he remained defiant, unashamed. "I've got the best lawyers money can buy," he said smugly to the reporters. "This will blow over. It always does." For a time, it seemed like he might be right. His legal team filed motion after motion to delay the trial, painting him as a victim of circumstance. But no amount of legal maneuvering could change the truth. The victims' stories were too compelling, their pain too raw. When the trial finally began in San Francisco, the courtroom was packed with people seeking justice, including Angela Lewis, a single mother who had lost her life savings to Westbrook's scheme. Sitting next to her was Michael Porter, a retired teacher who had invested his retirement savings into Westbrook's promise of wealth, only to end up losing everything. Their stories and countless others painted a picture of devastation. Every day of the trial, the victims took the stand, one after the other, describing the heartbreak Westbrook's actions had caused. Angela's voice quivered as she recalled the day she received the foreclosure notice for her home. "I begged them not to take it," she said through tears. "But they didn't care. My kids and I had to sleep in our car for 2 weeks. Do you know what that feels like?" Michael, too, shared his story. "I spent my whole life teaching, he said, his voice filled with anger. And this man destroyed my future with a single lie. Throughout it all, Westbrook sat unfazed, his demeanor unbothered, as if these were just distractions. Westbrook's behavior throughout the trial had only made things worse. He rolled his eyes during testimony, scrolled through his phone during key moments, and made sarcastic remarks to his attorney. His arrogance was palpable. His lack of remorse was evident. The more the victims testified, the more he distanced himself from the pain he had caused. On the third day of the trial, the prosecution introduced a series of damning emails that left no doubt about Westbrook's role in the scam. The emails showed how he had instructed his team to falsify documents and mislead investors. "Make the numbers look good," one email read. "We need them to sign." The courtroom was silent as the prosecutor read the words aloud. Westbrook's response? A smug grin. "Yes, I recognize it, but let's not pretend it means what you're implying," he said. "It's just business talk. You wouldn't understand." The room erupted in disbelief, but the judge, Judge Evelyn Harris, remained calm. "Mr. Westbrook," Judge Harris said, her voice steady, "I suggest you watch your tone. This is not a boardroom. This is a courtroom, and I expect you to behave accordingly." Westbrook did not flinch. In fact, his smirk only deepened. As the days passed, the prosecution's case grew stronger. The evidence against Westbrook piled up. Fraudulent transactions, falsified financial reports, and the testimonies of hundreds of victims. Each new piece of evidence seemed to drive the final nail into Westbrook's coffin. But through it all, he remained confident. But then came the day of Angela Lewis's testimony. She stood up in front of the court, her hands trembling as she held a crumpled piece of paper. She looked directly at Westbrook as she spoke, her voice breaking with emotion. "I trusted you," she said, her voice shaky but full of pain. "You promised me a better life, and instead, you ruined everything." Westbrook did not look up. He sat back in his chair, scrolling through his phone with an air of indifference. Angela's words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The prosecutor quickly interjected, pointing to Westbrook. "Your Honor, the defendant is clearly not paying attention to the witness," she said. "Mr. Westbrook," Judge Harris's voice cut through the tension in the room, "put your phone away, now." Westbrook glanced up for a moment, then reluctantly set his phone down. He gave an exaggerated sigh, as though annoyed by the interruption. The room fell into a tense silence as Angela continued her testimony. Every word she spoke seemed to pierce the air, and yet Westbrook remained unaffected, still too full of himself to truly grasp the weight of what was happening around him. As Angela's testimony ended, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The weight of her words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Westbrook's indifference only made the moment more painful for everyone who had come to seek justice. But the most shocking part was yet to come. The prosecution rested its case, leaving the defense to mount its argument. Westbrook's lawyers fought tooth and nail, attempting to shift the narrative, discredit the victims, and paint their client as the victim of a system gone wrong. But it was clear to everyone that no amount of legal maneuvering could undo the harm he had done. Judge Evelyn Harris sat silently at her bench, listening carefully to every word that was said. Her expression remained impassive, but her eyes were sharp, taking in every detail. She had seen many cases in her career, but Westbrook's arrogance had tested even her patience. Days went by, and the courtroom buzzed with gossip and speculation. Everyone was waiting for the final day, the day that would determine Westbrook's fate. Would the arrogance he had shown throughout the trial finally catch up to him? Or would his wealth and influence once again allow him to slip away unscathed? When the final day arrived, the tension was unbearable. Westbrook sat at the defense table, his demeanor unchanged, his arrogance still intact. He seemed convinced that nothing could touch him, but Judge Harris had other plans. Judge Harris stood up, her gavel raised, and the courtroom fell into an expectant silence. She looked directly at Westbrook, her eyes steady and unwavering. "Mr. Westbrook," she began, her voice calm yet powerful, "you have been found guilty of all charges: fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the testimonies of your victims have painted a clear picture of your actions." Westbrook sat still, his expression unreadable, but the faintest hint of nervousness flickered in his eyes. He was not used to this kind of powerlessness. "You used your power, wealth, and influence to destroy lives, Judge Harris continued. You preyed on the vulnerable, exploited their trust, and caused irreparable harm. Your actions were not just illegal, they were immoral. And now, Mr. Westbrook, she said, her voice growing colder, you will face the consequences of your actions. The courtroom was silent as she prepared to deliver the sentence. The tension in the air was palpable as Judge Harris paused for a moment. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the moment of truth. Finally, Judge Harris spoke. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, she declared. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Westbrook's face went pale as he sat frozen in disbelief. He had expected a much lighter sentence, perhaps a few years in a minimum security facility. But 25 years? This was a sentence reserved for the most serious offenders. Furthermore, Judge Harris continued, all of your assets are to be liquidated immediately. Every dollar you stole will be returned to the victims you harmed. The room broke into murmurs of approval, but Westbrook was seething with anger. You can't do this, he shouted, standing up. I'll appeal. I'll ruin your career. Judge Harris remained calm as always, her voice steady. Mr. Westbrook, this is my courtroom. Sit down, or I will have you removed. As Westbrook was escorted out, the courtroom erupted into applause. People cheered, relieved that justice had been served. As Westbrook was escorted out of the courtroom, the applause continued to echo, but Angela stood quietly at the front of the room, tears welling in her eyes. This moment was for her and for all the others who had lost everything because of Westbrook's greed. It was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but the road to healing was long. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered in clusters, hoping to get a word from the victims, and from Angela, who had been at the heart of the case. As she stepped out, a reporter approached her with a microphone, and the crowd fell silent. Angela, the reporter asked gently, how do you feel now that justice has been served? Angela hesitated for a moment, her voice soft but firm when she spoke. I feel relieved, but the truth is, this verdict won't bring back what we lost. My children and I are still rebuilding our lives, but at least now, we have hope. Nearby, Peter Vaughn, an elderly, retired firefighter who had lost his life savings to Westbrook's scheme, was speaking with a friend. It's not just about the sentence, he said, shaking his head. It's about sending a message. People like him think they're untouchable. Today, they found out they're not. Back in her chambers, Judge Harris sat by her desk, quietly reflecting on the case. She didn't feel a sense of triumph or victory, but rather a quiet satisfaction that she had done her job. She knew the work wasn't done yet, but for now, the wheels of justice had turned. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Come in, she called, and her clerk entered with a thick file in hand. The appeal papers for Westbrook, the clerk said, setting them down on the desk. Judge Harris sighed. She had expected this. Let him try, she muttered, flipping the file open. He won't win. Outside, the media frenzy was in full swing. News vans lined the streets, and reporters jostled to get the best angle for their cameras. But for those who had been directly affected by Westbrook's actions, this moment felt like a long-awaited victory. As the weeks passed, Westbrook's name continued to make headlines. The case became a symbol of accountability, a reminder that no one, no matter how rich or powerful, is above the law. And then one morning, a letter arrived at Judge Harris's office. It was from Angela's daughter, Sophia, who had written a heartfelt message expressing her gratitude for the judge's role in securing justice for their family. Thank you for showing us that justice is real, the letter read. You gave us a second chance. Judge Harris sat back in her chair, the letter in her hands, and for the first time in a long while, a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. This, she thought, was what justice was all about.